Last time, I survived 100 days with the Create mod in hardcore Minecraft, and I made a lot of awesome things, but there was still so much that I wanted to do. And based off a lot of the comments, it seemed like you all wanted to see more too. So now, I survived 200 days with the Create mod in hardcore Minecraft. Be sure to like and subscribe if you guys enjoy the video. During the first 100 days, I spent a lot of time manually mining, but this is modded Minecraft, so that's pretty much totally unacceptable. So to avoid doing this for another 100 days, on day 101, I started crafting all the create blocks I would need to make a tunnel bore. The deployers ended up needing a fair bit more brass plates than I anticipated, so I started making more brass and then pressing those into plates. On day 102, I continued to make more brass and press it into plates using the mechanical press. I ended up also running out of wood, so I went to the surface to chop down some more trees. I definitely needed to set up an automated tree farm, and you could argue I probably should have done it a really long time ago, but my heart was set on automating mining at the moment, so I just stuck with what I was doing. On the way back down to the cave, I also collected a bunch of extra andesite, as I was running low on that too. Apparently, I was just running low on quite literally everything I could possibly need for this entire build. And yes, this exact trend will continue for the next 98 days. Once I was back down in the cave, I finished making all the deployers I would need to set up the tunnel bore. Now that I had all the materials to make the tunnel bore, I headed down to Y-58, where I did all my mining for diamonds in the initial 100 days. I started to clear out a large area so I could assemble the actual tunnel bore, since it was going to take a surprising amount of space to get properly constructed. I began setting up the basic tunnel bore by placing down the cart assembler to attach the cart to the overall contraption, and then I built the frame over the assembler using some linear chassis so that they would all stay connected together. I placed down the plow in the back of the tunnel bore so it could break and collect all the rails the cart had just traveled over, so I really wouldn't need more than 10 rails or maybe even less for the bore to go an infinite distance. Now that I had the rail collection in place, I put down a deployer facing down in front of where the cart would be, so it could place fresh rails for the cart to travel on. You can basically think of this in conjunction with the plow as a loop of placing and breaking the exact same 5 or 6 rails repeatedly as the cart travels over them. I then built the head of the tunnel bore out of linear chassis so I could attach a layer of deployers and then another layer of drills onto it. On day 104, I realized I was a total frickin' moron and forgot to make the most critical part for the tunnel bore, which are the drills. So I went back to the cave to craft them along with some additional linear chassis that I was going to need. Apparently, my plan at the time was just to have the deployers slowly punch holes in the wall. And for those of you that may actually want to try that, no, that's not even possible. No matter how cool that might actually sound, it's not possible. I had to make more andesite alloy as the create blocks were just eating right through it, but thankfully, mixing to make it only requires half the materials it would take to actually craft it. So for all of you that were cringing during the first 100 days when I actually crafted it, I am now doing it in the correct manner. Once I finished all my crafting, I went back down into the mine to finish the tunnel bore. I had to redo the dimensions of the head of the tunnel bore due to the number of drills I made, and I ended up extending the body of the tunnel bore by 1 just to make room for 1 more deployer, which would place down blocks in front of the rail. This deployer, along with the deployers behind the drills, would fill in any lava or water pockets that could disrupt the tunnel bore, and then the drills would simply mine the blocks that were just placed. This would allow the tunnel bore to mine through quite literally anything in its path, and that meant I could pretty much just AFK and not pay attention and get all the resources I wanted. On day 105, the tunnel bore was finally finished and ready for its maiden voyage. I placed down a furnace minecart on the track and gave the cart assembler a redstone signal, which attached the contraption above it onto the furnace minecart. I prayed that I attached everything correctly and put some coal into the furnace minecart and off it went. It immediately ran into a lot of lava, which was actually a good test to see if it could truly make it through anything, and it did. I noted that in a future version I should add more deployers to make a shell around it, but that was for another day. For the next 3 days, I followed behind the tunnel bore, lit up the area as I went, and mined all the exposed ores that were on the walls of the tunnel. Eventually, I had enough and picked up the cart contraption with my wrench and ran back to the cave. Now that I had an entire tunnel board to unload, I started off day 109 by setting up an unloading area for the cart contraption. I put down some rails to place it on and some chests to move the valuable resources into. I placed down the cart contraption, which ended up placing down a layer of deep slate in front of it, as the deployers actually fired once the minute it went down. I placed down the cart assembler on top of it to turn the cart contraption back into actual blocks, so that I could access all the chests and get all my loot, but I totally forgot to change the direction of the cart assembler, so it flipped the tunnel board to the opposite direction before actually placing it down. Thankfully, nothing important was destroyed, but it came pretty darn close. I cleared out all the chests of valuable resources and took a double chest worth of deep slate so I would never have to mine for it to decorate the cave ever again. I picked back up the minecart contraption and decided next time I'd run it a little bit longer since the returns were slightly lackluster for the amount of time I spent with it. With automated mining out of the way, I decided to start working on an automated tree farm since I kept running out of wood. Funny enough, I was out of wood again, so I spent day 110 on the surface just manually chopping down trees for what would hopefully be the final time. I also went to find some sheep to shear while I was there, but to my surprise, they were hiding from me. I guess they really didn't take all that kindly to me killing their friends really early on in the first 100 days. So I just wandered around for ages before finding a single sheep, and I got so unbelievably tilted that I just gave up. I returned back to the cave, but not before mining even more andesite to fund my ever-growing create builds. On day 111, I started crafting all the blocks I would need to make the tree farm, but noticed I needed even more deployers and didn't have enough nether quartz to make the electron tubes that went into crafting them. So I made a quick trip to the nether to mine some. I got just enough nether quartz and left pretty quickly because there was a bit of commotion going on around me, and quite honestly, I found that the easiest way to stay alive in hardcore is just to hide in a hole in the wall and never really interact with anything. I finished up crafting all the blocks I would need for the tree farm and another windmill that I would eventually use to power it. I used day 112 to clear out the area for the windmill directly next to the first one that was currently running both the kelp farm and the sand generator. Once the area was cleared out, I duplicated the first windmill because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And quite honestly, I had no other designs for vertical windmills that didn't look absolutely moronic. You could probably argue that this one also looks moronic, but I like how it looks, so I'm just going to stick with it. On day 113, I went to clear out the area behind the windmill to use for the tree farm, but pretty quickly realized that it was still part of the huge pocket of water that caused me a lot of trouble when I was making the sand generator. I really didn't want to deal with building near this mess a second time, so I shifted my plans a little bit and decided to use the minecart unloading station area for the tree farm, and that meant I would have to move the minecart unloading station somewhere else. I finished off the day by clearing out a space nearby, which is where I would eventually move it to. Day 114 was spent clearing out more of the area for the new minecart unloading station. I had to venture into the large pool of water to block off some of the edge so I could clear another 1 or 2 blocks back, mainly just because the head of the tunnel bore was so big, it needed a lot of room. Most of the time, I love living in this cave, but this stupid pocket of water was really making me hate it whenever I had to work around it, and that was happening more often than I'd like. I regretted not having a good helmet enchant or potion of water breathing, so I pretty much did the bare minimum and called it quits. I finished off the day by replacing a bunch of random dirt and gravel blocks with deep slate just to make the area look a little bit nicer. On day 115, I was finally able to spruce up the now cleared out minecart unloading area. I made sure to put down plenty of chests to store all the useful building blocks and valuable resources in, along with some lanterns and chains, just to give the area a bit of a grungy vibe. I then moved all the items from the chests in the old minecart unloading area to the new one and cleared out all the remaining blocks in the old area so that it was prime and ready to go for the tree farm. With the area no longer occupied, I used day 116 to clear out the space for the tree farm. I made a circle with a radius of 5 since I planned on making a radial tree farm that would be very similar to the radial kelp farm that I made in the first 100 days. I started to fill the area with dirt, but quickly realized that much like all my other resources, I was also out of dirt. so I went to collect some more. Once I had enough, I came back and finished filling in the base of the tree farm, but pretty quickly decided it looked bad, so I cleared all the dirt out again and raised it up a block. With the area properly laid out, I spent day 117 assembling the radial tree farm contraption. I placed down a mechanical bearing that would eventually connect the windmill and spin the farm with a radial chassis on top to eventually hold onto the arm that would cut down the trees. I placed down mechanical saws on the lowest layer of the arm and put chests and a portable storage interface on top to hold all the blocks and deposit them when the time came. Lastly, I put 5 deployers on the highest layer, pointing down to plant the saplings as the arm rotated. Finally, I placed some saplings in the chest and connected the farm to rotational power to make sure it all worked. On day 118, I went to the surface to chop down more trees because I only had about a third of the saplings I needed for the farm, and they really didn't seem to be growing all that fast. I spent the entire day chopping down tree after tree after tree, and finished with about 4 stacks of logs and plenty of saplings to fill the farm with. After returning back to the base on day 119, I stopped the tree farm and placed all the new saplings that I had just gotten into the chest so that they could be planted. I started the tree farm up again, and just like that, the farm was filled. While I waited for some of the trees to grow, I started clearing out the area around the tree farm and just replacing random blocks with deep slate and moss to make it look a little bit nicer. I placed down the second portable storage interface so the tree farm would be able to deposit all the logs once it actually started chopping down trees, and decided on how I wanted to pull the items out of the interface. I ended up settling on a smart chute since it could pull full stacks of items at a time rather than 16 like a normal chute would, and it would put them onto a depot. I placed down 2 different brass funnels on other sides of the depot to filter saplings to one side and logs to the other side, and just have those put into chests for storage. On day 120, I was really starting to get worried because no trees had grown yet, and I figured it might have been because using the spruce saplings, they were attempting to grow the large spruce trees since they were all directly next to each other. Hard to imagine actually screwing up growing trees, but somehow I managed to do exactly that. Sometimes I even impress myself. I figured I'd give up on the dream of farming spruce trees and just went to the surface to get some basic oak saplings to swap into the farm in their place. It took forever to find oak trees to chop down, but by the end of the day I had plenty of oak saplings to replace in the farm, which was good because I had completely run out of food and was ready to head home. Days 121 and 122 were my last ditch effort to perfect the tree farm. I felt like the dirt was kinda gross in the area, so I replaced it with moss to add in a nice green color, and I replaced all the spruce saplings with oak saplings, so hopefully the trees would actually be able to grow. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have spruce wood for building, but majority of the time I used it for crafting, so it didn't really matter what kind of trees it was. I started the system back up and began working on the item output section. Having switched from spruce saplings to oak, now I had to account for the fact that there were apples, so I made 3 item lanes for apples and sticks, saplings, and oak logs. I went under the tree farm and connected the rotational power to the belts and finally got it going in the correct direction using cogwheels connected to the middle belt. I also added in brass funnels instead of andesite funnels, simply to allow 1 stack at a time to be input rather than 1 item at a time. I spent day 123 cleaning up the area around the tree farm and improving the item storage area. I closed in the chest and put item frames over each one to show what items were actually being stored there. Unfortunately, I couldn't show both apples and sticks, so I chose to go with apples because they have this nice red color, and that looks a lot nicer than a lame brown line being put on the item frame. I got rid of a majority of the clay in the area and added some bushes and moss carpet and all that jazz to bring the area to life a little bit. Day 124 started out with me crafting the blocks I would need to make overflow switches for each of the output chests for the tree farm, since in the end, they would fill up pretty quick. I dug out the area below all the chests and placed down stockpile switches on each one to read what % full the chests were and invert the signal so it's on until they reach 90% full and then it switches off until they reach 60% full. I placed redstone down below the chests and put smart chutes under each one too. This would all make it so the smart chutes will only allow items to go through it when the chest is at 90% full, and it'll disable items going through it when the chest is 60% full. I placed lava in the area under the smart chutes that would burn the items when they fell through, and with that, the overflow setup was done. With the tree farm now functioning, I was free to move on to my next project on day 125. I was getting tired of hopping up my steps to get to the surface, so I figured now was a good time to make an elevator. I marked the area I wanted the elevator to come down to in the cave, and then I went to the surface and dug a 3x3 area all the way down to the spot I marked. I finished off the day by crafting some linear chassis to potentially use for the elevator base, and collected a bunch of building blocks that I would actually make the elevator itself out of. Day 126 was a building day. I spent the entire day trying to make a semi-acceptable looking elevator with the block palette I had been using for the cave, and it gave me a little bit more trouble than I would have liked. I had to make sure everything was properly glued together, since I didn't actually end up using linear chassis for the base, and would only have one block connected to the rope pulley in the end. By the end of the day, I at least felt I had a passable elevator ready to go. Now that I had the elevator itself made, I had to construct the mechanism that would raise and lower it. I spent the start of day 127 crafting all the blocks I would need to make the surface level elevator contraption. I placed down a rope pulley over the center of the 3x3 pit and connected it to a gear shift that would allow me to reverse the rotation by inputting a redstone signal. I then hooked up a water wheel to power it and did an initial trial by lowering the rope pulley to attach it to the elevator. I used a lever to manually switch the direction since I didn't have it fully set up yet, and it brought the elevator back up. As the sun set, the elevator successfully made its way to the surface. Day 128 was another day of building, as I set the goal of making the elevator contraption on the surface also look semi-presentable. I started out by setting up the redstone toggle using a powered toggle latch to act as a compact T flip-flop, and hooking it up to a redstone link so I could have both buttons working wirelessly. I then geared up the water wheel by 2 times so the elevator wouldn't be too slow and still not too fast, and designed a fancy little single water wheel housing area to keep it in. With everything ready to go on day 129, I was excited to test out the newly completed elevator. Sadly, when I went to go back down on it, the entire elevator broke. Apparently, my supergluing skills leave a little bit to be desired. In the end, I had to tear down the entire build and reassemble it with careful focus on what was glued to what, and by the end of the day it was ready to go. I spent day 130 and 131 cleaning up and decorating the area around the base of the elevator. I decided it was time for the curved staircase to become a little bit less curved, so I connected it to the elevator area, and now it's a slightly less curved, or as some of you may call it, a straight staircase. All in all, I was quite happy with how it turned out. To celebrate, I took a joyride up the elevator and then back down. If you all couldn't tell, I am clearly making good use of my time during this video. On day 132, I wanted to send the tunnel bore on another mining trip, but figured it would be good to make some upgrades that I had been thinking of before sending it off. I wanted to get some andesite this time, so instead of going down into deep slate, I stayed a little bit higher. I cleared out an area, placed down the tunnel bore, and added an outline of linear chassis around the entire tunnel bore head. I made them all sticky and placed deployers down on each one. Unfortunately, I was short 1 deployer and 1 linear chassis. I replaced every filter on the deployer with cobblestone and removed the deep slate that they were currently holding. I figured I'd be too triggered by missing 1 deployer, so I actually went back upstairs, grabbed some quartz from the nether, made another deployer, and finished off the tunnel bore. The tunnel bore was ready for its next mining trip on day 133, but when I went to fuel it up, it just didn't go. I really wasn't sure what's wrong, so I spent day 133 and 134 troubleshooting it. I tried replacing it, rebuilding parts of it, anything I could think of, and really nothing worked. Eventually I found out that for some reason, furnace minecarts can't accept dried kelp blocks, even though regular furnaces happily burn them and they're actually the best fuel. And after punching a hole in the wall real quick, I returned to my computer and fueled up the tunnel bore like normal. Over the next 5 days, I followed the tunnel bore and lit up the area behind it. It's not much, but it's honest work. Once I got bored, I picked up the tunnel bore and started my way back to the base. The entire way back, I mined all the exposed ore on the wall of the tunnel and ended up filling my entire inventory and then some. It was definitely way more copper than I would ever need, but if I processed it correctly, I could get a fair bit of experience from it. Once I got back to the base, I placed down the tunnel bore in the unloading area and took out all my andesite, deep slate, and any valuable resources and dumped them into their respective chests. Since the tunnel bore had gotten me countless stacks of ore, I spent day 140 crafting a majority of the blocks I would need to make an ore processing setup. Not only would this net me more ingots per ore, but it would also get me experience nuggets and even secondary byproducts like clay, gunpowder, and even nether quartz. Day 141 to 144 were spent assembling the entire ore processing setup. I put down the crushing wheels to start the setup since it would be the main step and figured horizontally would probably look the coolest. I then ran a long belt under the crushing wheels and far past them, as this would be the main belt of the system and would carry a bulk of the items. I made 2 offshoot areas where a brass tunnel would direct items in the proper direction. The first one taking crushing byproducts to storage areas, and the second one taking wash products to storage areas. I planned on using the new item vaults for storage, which can't be accessed manually and must have items automatically input and output. In between the 2 offshoots, I set up a washing area, which would convert the crushed ore into nuggets, and finally, I placed down a basin and a press to make the nuggets into ingots. Once the setup was made, I connected all the rotational power and used multiple water wheels to power it. In the end, it took some fiddling to get the correct rotational direction for each part, but once it was done, I was ecstatic. On day 145, I was ready to put the ore processor to the test and moved a bulk of the ore I got from the tunnel bore into the chest that would load the main belt system. While everything seemed to be working for the most part, I noticed the crushed ore wasn't being washed fast enough, which meant it could clog up the system down the line and eventually stall it out altogether. To fix this, I put a second set of encased fans to blow water over the other side of the belt, since twice as many fans will actually double the washing speed. This required a bit of reworking the rotational power connection, but in the end it was well worth it since it did appear to fix the issue. Day 146 brought with it another issue with the ore processing setup that was a bit further down the line than the washing area. With the quantity of nuggets coming from the washing, the press wasn't actually able to keep up with turning it into ingots and again, was stalling out the system. To fix this, I simply geared up the rotational power going into the press and made it run at light speed. While this did the trick to fix it, I don't suggest standing next to it because it is definitely really annoying to listen to. Now that all the problems were fixed, hopefully, I was able to spend day 147 setting up the item vault outputs so I could actually get my grubby little hands on all the items that the system was making. I put a bunch of depots to hold each item and a brass funnel to output them from the vaults. Unfortunately, I didn't have one of each item to actually set the filters for the brass funnels, so some of these would have to wait, but the finishing touch on the system was complete. Short of silk touching all my ore and then processing it in this exact system, I was finally getting the most bang for my buck when I actually went mining. On day 148, I wanted to put the experience nuggets I was getting from the ore processing to good use and went on a bit of an enchanting spree. My goal was to get perfectly enchanted diamond armor and tools prior to upgrading them to netherite, and without villagers, I figured my best bet to get protection 4 and breaking 3 armor was just to combine 2 pieces. So that's exactly what I did. In the end, I didn't manage to finish off all my gear, but I finished my chest and my boots and was happy to leave that until I got more experience nuggets. Since I needed more experience to finish my enchanting, I really did the only logical thing a person can think of, and I took the tunnel bore for yet another trip on day 149 to day 152. After placing it down, I sat on the back of it placing torches while it mined away from me, and eventually mined all the exposed ores, lining the walls on the way back to the base. On day 153, I had to do the unfortunate chore of unloading the tunnel bore. I took out all the valuables as per usual, but the chests were becoming quite clogged with a lot of the junk items, so I figured it was time to make a trash chute. Before I could set anything up, I had to run down into the mine to get some lava since apparently I was completely out. Once I had that, I dug out a little area directly next to the unloading station and placed down a chest with a smart chute that would drop all the items in the chest into some lava. I intentionally used a smart chute over a normal chute even though it's more expensive for 2 reasons. 1, it would drop a stack at a time and speed up the process, and 2, it could be turned on and off with a redstone signal, which would be useful in case I ever clicked the wrong item into the chest. With the garbage chute set up and ready to go, I spent day 154 doing the extremely boring task of moving all the junk blocks from the tunnel bore chests into the garbage dump chest. I was honestly astounded at the amount of blocks it had mined through, but this also kind of seemed like payback for past me being way too lazy to fully empty it during all those prior mining trips. Now the majority of my gear was either properly enchanted or at least well on its way to that, I decided day 155 was the perfect day for me to get my hands on enough netherite to upgrade every piece of gear. Thankfully, the tunnel bore I made for the overworld mining would do the trick in the nether too, so I grabbed it, mined down to Y level 15 in the nether, and started setting it up. As per usual, I replaced the deployer's item filters with netherrack, and then fueled it up and let it go. I'm sure you're probably quite tired of the tunnel bore at this point, and believe me, I was too, so let's all just be mad at past Rage together for using it so much. He's the bad guy, not me. For the next 5 days, I yet again followed the tunnel bore and lit up the area. Granted, there was a bit more lava this time, and gravel could allow it to actually spill through the ceiling, even though my extra deployers were supposed to prevent that. Once I got bored enough, I picked it up and mined all the nether quartz and ancient debris on the walls of the tunnel as I ran back to the portal. Day 160 was yet another unloading day. Big surprise, I know. I first got to see I managed to collect 21 ancient debris, which in reality wasn't all that great for how long the tunnel bore actually mined for, but it was a small tunnel bore, so I gave it a pass. This was sufficient to upgrade majority of the important pieces of gear that I had, and I could just get more later because obviously we have not had enough mining footage yet. I dumped the rest of the junk in the garbage chute and made sure to store all the nether quartz and gold nuggets in their own chest. On day 161, I was so excited and ready to use my fancy new ancient debris to make netherite tools and gear, so I smelted it down, and when I went to take it out and upgrade my stuff, I realized it had to be repaired to do that, and I had spent all my diamonds on something that was probably maybe useful. So you know what time it is? Tunnel bore time! Run it back! So because we're clearly all embarrassed I'm using this again, I'm embarrassed, you're embarrassed, my cats are embarrassed, let's keep it short, let's keep it sweet. I placed the thing, it mined the things, I followed it, I mined the way back, and boom. Now it's the end of day 164 and I have all the amazing stuff that I needed. It's like magic. On day 165, I prayed to God I could make it at least 5 days without using the tunnel bore again. At this point, my wife was even getting jealous of just how much time I was spending with the stupid tunnel bore. But seriously, it was time to unload the tunnel bore as usual, store all the valuables, and ditch all the junk in the garbage chute. Now that I had plenty of diamonds, I repaired all my gear and finished enchanting it, at least to a suitable point to upgrade it to netherite. I only had enough to upgrade all 3 pieces of my armor, and my pick and my shovel, but that was more than enough for now. Spoiler alert, this idiot on camera uses the tunnel bore again later for mining the last bit of netherite. Big surprise, I know. Since majority of the open area had been used up by create builds, I used day 166 to clear out and spruce up the area next to the tree farm. I really disliked how many random blocks there were everywhere and how much water was sitting around, so I replaced most of it with deep slate and moss since at this point I was absolutely in love with the black and green color scheme. With majority of the large-scale redesign of the area done, I spent day 167 and 168 making a subtle staircase down from the ledge where the future builds would go to the tree farm. Yes, I know it took me a whole 2 days to make a staircase, but in my defense, the area was pretty cramped and I had just taken an antihistamine, so I was functioning at like 30% brain power maximum. I seriously hate having allergic reactions, but alas, there was Minecraft to be done, so it shall be done. At 30% speed albeit, but at the end of day 168, I had a staircase I was actually quite happy with. On day 169, I started clearing out an area at the top of the staircase to set up a bulk smelter. I placed down 4 depots since I couldn't imagine needing more than that at any given time, and made an area where the lava would be encased but still be able to be blown down through the iron bars using encased fans. The only problem was I had no encased fans, so I went to craft those, which involved mixing more andesite alloy, and pressing of iron plates. To finish off the day, I placed down the encased fans above where the lava would be going. Day 170 was all about rotational power because behind every cool build is a properly functioning rotational power supply and transmission. Lesson of the day for all you create newbies out there. I powered the encased fans with 2 water wheels that would be exposed at the top of the staircase and spent a bit too long connecting the rotational power so each encased fan would spin in the same direction. This is crucial because they all have to blow air down, otherwise they won't actually smelt the items that are on the depots. To finish it off, I tossed in the lava, closed it off, and did a quick test run with some cobblestone. On day 171, I realized my generic storage was getting a bit cluttered is probably a nice way to put it, so I figured making a secondary garbage chute a bit closer would be a pretty good idea. I definitely didn't need stacks and stacks of netherrack just sitting in my chests, so hopefully this would help me not just dump them in there. I grabbed some lava and set up the exact same garbage chute I had before, using a chest, smart chute, and the lava I just grabbed. I made quick use of it right away to ditch some of the junk I had, and then spent the rest of the day clearing out an area for the next build, which was going to be a wheat farm. Day 172 and 173 consisted of me cleaning up the area I had just cleared out for the radial wheat farm and making sure it properly blended in with the base around it. I thought making it sort of a hole-in-the-wall farm would look pretty cool and help further blend the mechanical side of the base with the organic side of it. In the end, I was actually quite happy with how it looked, as it was semi-natural looking, so I went and crafted and collected all the items I would need to make the wheat farm itself. And I'm pretty sure you can all list them by heart at this point, since it's the 3rd radial farm I've made and they're all pretty similar, but circles are great, farms are great, when you put them together it's just better, so I'm probably never going to stray away from this design. On day 174, I started out by constructing the radial wheat farm using a mechanical bearing with a radial chassis on top to hold on to the mechanical harvesters, chests, and portable storage interface. The nice thing about the mechanical harvesters is they harvest and replant for you, so the farm can be even more basic than the tree farm, which needed deployers to replant the saplings. With the farm complete, I started clearing out the area next to it, where I would put both the windmill to power it and eventually the wheat processing plant. The next 3 days I spent actually assembling said wheat processing plant. I placed down a long belt system to carry the items, and then placed down 2 millstones to process the wheat into wheat flour. Since I had 2 belts, I put down brass tunnels and set them to round robin, so every other piece of wheat will be split to the second belt just to prevent backups. I put down 6 encased fans after the millstones that would be split 50-50 between water and fire. These fans would convert the wheat flour to dough and then cook the dough into bread. With majority of the main setup complete, I spent day 178 connecting the rotational components of the system together. I even connected the farm itself, since everything would be powered by one single windmill. At the time, I wasn't able to perfect the connections since I wasn't really sure the direction everything would go in, but that would be pretty fixable with a gearbox here or some cog wheels there later down the line. The last part of the setup that was left was the actual rotational power, which again is arguably the most important part. So I spent day 179 clearing out the area next to the wheat processing plant and set up yet another vertical windmill. Speed was really not going to be an issue at this farm and processing plant, so a windmill made perfect sense. High stress capacity and low speed. I connected the windmill to the plant and farm connection, and then did some super boring troubleshooting to make sure everything was rotating in the proper directions. It wasn't the prettiest behind the scenes, but that's why we just cover all that stuff up. Day 180 was a pretty boring one, since I didn't have any bone meal and I still had to troubleshoot the farm, which meant a lot of sitting and watching until wheat grew. Like literally just sitting and watching. Thankfully I did, because I quickly realized I had to add in an additional smart chute under the belts to drop seeds into lava. I had already placed some under the later part of the belt for the seeds the millstone made, but because seeds couldn't enter the millstone and come out the other side, I had to put more in before the millstone to get the seeds the actual harvesters collected. With this small fix, it seemed the wheat farm and processing plant were fully functional. The animals of the world could rejoice, since I would no longer have to kill them to get food. Spoiler alert though, I still kill them for food. My next goal was to make a precision mechanism production line, which was going to require a fair bit of resources, so I spent day 181 crafting up everything I would need to make it. Or so I thought. Another spoiler alert, past Rage thought he crafted everything, but he definitely was short on some items. Since I had yet again run out of space in the base that was cleared out for builds, I spent day 182 clearing out the area next to the ore processing setup to make the precision mechanism line. The production line itself wasn't going to need to be very big, but the one downside of living in a lush cave is there's so much random stuff and water everywhere, which tends to make building around it actually pretty difficult. With the area now cleared out and ready to go, I spent days 183 to 186 actually building the production line. The precision mechanisms are made using a sequenced assembly, which is essentially an assembly line using deployers. This specific one needed 3 deployers to place a cogwheel, a large cogwheel, and an iron nugget onto a sheet of gold. I made a looped conveyor belt system that could properly loop items around because the gold plate has to go through the assembly line 5 different times just to finish the craft. I also made additional offshoots from the main line because there's a 20% chance the craft actually fails and makes an assortment of materials, most of which can actually be used again in the craft. If this all sounds really complicated and sort of weird, that's because it is, but the general idea is basically loop it 5 times. If it works, awesome. If it fails, hope it refunds you something that's actually useful. In the end, I finished with 3 chests, 1 for inputting items, 1 for the finished precision mechanisms, and 1 for all the random junk from it failing. Now that the bones of the setup were complete, I had to connect the rotational power. I spent days 187 and 188 connecting everything, which proved to actually be semi-difficult because it was a fairly compact setup to start. Rather than hook this setup to new power, I figured I could get away with just using the water wheels that were running the ore processing system, since those were wickedly overkill on stress capacity anyway. It took a lot of fiddling with the different mechanisms of moving the rotational power to get everything going in the correct direction, but eventually it was all working. In an attempt to not totally bore you guys, I left out the details about how many filters were actually needed on the assembly line, but it needed a lot. Like a lot. More than I had enough wool to make, so I went to the surface to find some sheep yet again. Much like every other time I tried to find sheep, it proved to be very difficult and time consuming, since apparently the game wanted me to find every passive mob under the sun other than sheep. After my sheep hunting adventure, I spent day 190 putting some items into the system and watching it run to actually troubleshoot if there were any issues. Right out the gate, it appeared to work perfectly, and once I got the first precision mechanism, I was able to swap it out for one of the filters, which was clearly very critical to do since filters and wool in general was a very hot commodity for me. I never really thought I would get to that point, but here we are, wishing that we had more wool. The large and messy waterfall near the assembly line was really starting to bother me, so I spent days 191 and 192 cleaning up that entire portion of the cave. I leveled out the bottom of the pool of water and filled in any of the gaps so it at least looked presentable, and then I went on a bit of a spree replacing all the miscellaneous blocks around the area with either moss, deep slate, or andesite. Once I had all the blocks replaced, I went and grabbed a bunch of deep slate slabs and tried at least to make every step up a gradual increase using slabs to sort of blend the areas together. While it wasn't really needed, it looked pretty nice, and it also came with the bonus of not having to jump when running, which is just too good to pass up. And for those of you that use the auto step up feature, you guys are kind of weird. Unless most people use that and then I'm the weird one. I honestly have no idea if people use that or not. On day 193, I went to build a gold generator. Just kidding, I took the tunnel board to the nether to get some more netherite. You guys totally fell for that one. In fairness, I did say earlier that I would come back before the 200 days ended, and here we are. Once I got to the nether, placed down the tunnel bore, and replaced all the filters on the deployers, I realized I didn't bring any fuel with me, so I went back, grabbed some coal, and then was ready to go. I spent the next 4 days as you'd expect, following the tunnel bore like a lost dog and eventually mining everything on the way back. This time though, I had Silk Touch and made a point to even mine the gold ore, since it could all be processed now to give me those sweet experience nuggets. On day 197, I was finally back in the overworld, and it was time to unload the tunnel bore and check the huge haul of loot that I got. I managed to get more ancient debris than I would actually need, so I guess I could have actually stopped it sooner, but oh well, hindsight's 2020. I trashed all the junk and moved all the silk-touched ores over to the ore processing to be crushed down for experience as actually the main thing that I wanted, and then all that other crap that comes from it too. On day 198 and 199, they were pretty low-key as my last goal of the video was to finish enchanting and upgrading all my tools and armor. I was able to do a fair bit of enchanting out the gate, but apparently I really overestimated the amount of experience nuggets I had left and then spent a fair bit of those 2 days just sitting, waiting for the ore processing system to actually crush down all the stuff I had just gotten and turn it into experience nuggets. In the end, I wasn't able to make a fancy enchant for my hoe like I wanted, or even my helm, but that was fine because I never really used either of them. At the end of the day, I finished all the enchanting I could do and finally upgraded my remaining tools to netherite. And with that, it was day 200. I was more than happy with the progress I managed to make during these 100 days, and I really hope you all enjoyed the video. If you guys want to see 300 days in this world, be sure to let me know in the comments, and also, as I said earlier, be sure to like and subscribe because it definitely helps me out a ton.